in real life. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Translators On Air. My name is Dmitry Kornikhov. I'm your host. Join me today, my incredible co-host, Elena Tereshenko. Hi, Elena.
Hi, everyone.
And our guest tonight, Corinne McKay. Hi, Corinne.
Hi, greetings from Colorado.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Corinne. Corinne is an ATA-certified French to English translator based in Boulder, Colorado, in the United States. She's a full-time freelancer since 2002. She translates in the areas of international development, corporate communication, content marketing, and nonfiction books. Her translation of Erhard, Loretan, and Jean Ammann's Night Naked, a climber autobiography, was shortlisted for the 2017 Boardman Tasker Prize for mountain literature. And Corinne's business guidebook, How to Succeed as a Freelance Translator, has sold over 12,000 copies. And her blog, Thoughts on Translation, won the 2016 ProZ Community Choice Award as the best blog about translation. In addition to her own translation and writing work, Corinne serves as the current president of the American Translators Association. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing a variety of topics, but mostly how to improve your freelance mindset, how to identify factors that you can and cannot control, and how to choose marketable specialization and niches, in which situations you might want to look for in our career, and a lot of other topics. But before we jump to the topic of our conversation, I would like to make a few announcements. As always, the 5th season of Translators On Air has been sponsored by our friends at SmartCat. SmartCat developed a great platform where you can find more work, collaborate with other translators, use the CAT tool absolutely for free. So if it's something you're interested in, check out SmartCat by clicking the green button below this video, or if you're watching or listening to this in the recording, you can always visit the first link in the description. All right, we have quite a few people tuning in. Let me welcome everyone. Hello, Aurelie, Becky, Ina, Sudeep, Victoria, Anna Maria, Rafa, Angelique, Anna, Marisa, Mar, Fabienne, Maxine, Erin, Lucia, Tanya, Anya, Adriana, John, Monica, Corinne, Oksana, Yulia, Aurelie, Simona, Natalia, Mary, Aliandra, Naidi, Lina, Barbara, Julia, Jennifer, Caitlin, Magda, and Haynes. Sorry if I butchered any of your names. I didn't mean to do that. We have quite an international crowd here. I also see a few new faces here, so let me quickly explain how this platform works and what's going to be happening today. This is a live webinar. You can actually participate in the discussion. We have a chat window on the right-hand side. You can use it to say hi and hello. You can tell us where you're from, what languages you work with, and how long you've been a freelance translator. And you can also share the recording of this webinar. You can share the link of this webinar and invite your friends and colleagues to join us, because more people, more fun. And if you have a specific question and you want Corinne, Yelena, and me to answer a question, we have a dedicated section below this video stream. It says Ask a Question. You can post your question there, and we'll be more than happy to discuss it. All right, thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy this webinar. Corinne, over to you. How are you?
Okay, fantastic. So when Elena asked me to be the guest, she sent me, I think it was a question from one of your viewers. I'm not sure whether that person is here today. If you are here, you can say who you are if you want, but you don't have to. You said, I think this scenario, if you want to remain anonymous, that's totally fine. So I think the scenario that she gave us was she's been freelancing for about 11 years and she feels like her business has stagnated. So what advice would I have for her on getting out of that rut? So then I think when I talked to Elena and Dmitry, that brought up sort of a lot of other questions that I think we as freelancers have to think about. So maybe I'll talk a little bit, give sort of a opening statement first, and then you guys can ask other questions, or I looked at everyone's questions that you submitted ahead of time, but you guys can also ask impromptu questions and I'll answer them if I can. So when we think about stagnation or what to do if you feel like, I think the title Dmitry picked was Jumpstarting Your Freelance Business. I think we need to think about that in a few different ways. So if I were talking directly to the listener, viewer who asked that question, I think I would start with three things. When you say stagnation, do you mean you don't have enough work, period? You have enough work, but you're not making enough money? Because those are two different things, right? I don't have enough work and I'm busy all the time, but I don't make enough money. Or do you mean you're sick of what you're doing? So when you say stagnation, do you mean I have work, but I sit down at my computer in the morning and I go like, ugh, I don't want to do this. So those, I think, are three different things that anyone who feels that they are, stagnant. One thing I think we as freelancers tend to do is make these big generalizations. This is not very helpful. And what we need to do is break it down into, I'm stagnating doesn't really tell me that much about what's wrong with someone's business. And I think I would identify it as one of those three things. Either you just feel like you don't have enough work, period, you're not making enough money, or you just feel burnout on what you're doing. So I think one thing is any problem you feel in your freelance business, try to break it down as narrowly as you can, or try to break it down to the smallest possible increment. Like, one thing that I often tell the students in my classes is, in order for your business to improve, one thing to do is focus on what are the things that are going right in your business and why are they going right? So when you think, what was your favorite project that you did this year? Where did that client come from? How did they find you? What was so satisfying to you? What made that project more satisfying than your other work? Like, all of those types of things, I think, are a lot more helpful than just like, yay, I did this great project. So I think that's one thing that your listener needs to think about. So then I think sort of hanging topics that we're going to talk about today are two factors. The effect of machine translation and artificial intelligence on our professions, and the increasing number of freelancers in the market. So let's talk about those for a little bit. So I think most translators, when you talk about machine translation, feel either machine translation is worthless, it's garbage, which it's not, or machine translation is going to put all human translators and interpreters out of business next week, which it's not. And so I think, and of course, this should all be with the caveat that this is my take on that topic, and other people have different takes, which I think are interesting too. So the thing I think when we talk about both of those things, MT/AI and the increasing number of freelancers in the market, to me, the bottom line is, like, I have a 15-year-old daughter. If you look closely, you can probably see her as a baby in the picture on the wall behind me. But she's now as tall as I am. And to me, sort of the bottom line is, if she is soon going to be in a position of thinking about what she wants to do with her life. And if she wanted to be a translator or interpreter, I would feel very positive about that. I would encourage that, and I would pay for her to go to university to learn that skill. Sadly, she wants to be an engineer, so that's not going to happen. But I think that the two ends of the MT spectrum are, if you think machine translation is completely useless, I would encourage you to go put a purely factual informational text into a machine translation engine like DeepL and tell me that the output from that would not be acceptable for some purposes. Because, when I go on vacation to Italy with my family and I speak like this much Italian, I use Google Translate and DeepL a lot to figure out directions to places, to figure out what day this museum is closed, to figure out all kinds of factual things like that. And I actually think it is possible that within the working lifetimes of those of us in the industry today, that we will see a lot of information only translations taken over by machine translation. I think that honestly, I think that is happening already. For example, at the Colorado Translators Association conference, which was a couple of weeks ago, we had a speaker who used to work for one of the European Union entities. And the EU has invested heavily in machine translation. And she said, essentially, I lost my job to machine translation. I was on a temporary contract with this EU entity. And at the end of it, they decided that they could decrease the team for my language by 2 people because they're sending all of the formulaic documents to MT. And essentially, I lost my job to a computer. So I think people who say that's never going to happen, sorry, it's happening already. But on the other end of the spectrum, my clients, for the kind of work I do, think MT is a joke. My clients, so one thing I think about in my work is, what is the type of work that will never be taken over by MT? And here's an example. One of my clients is a private charitable foundation in Switzerland, and they hired me because they feel that in order to increase their donor base, that they need a social media presence. And so they told me, we know that writing engaging content to motivate donors in French is a lot different than writing engaging content to motivate donors in English. So what we want you to do is read our blog posts and write an American post inspired by our French blog post. And to me, that is an example of something that a computer can't do. And when I have a little document that I send my clients sometimes of French source text, DeepL's translation, Corinne's translation, and you don't even have to speak French to see, okay, DeepL translated the words okay, but DeepL doesn't understand how to engage or inspire or motivate a human. So I think those are things that I think about in my own business, that I feel like on one end of the spectrum, you have to accept that if a translation that gives you the general gist of something fits your purposes, it's a lot more appealing to get that for free in 10 seconds than it is to pay a person to do it over the course of 3 days. That's just true. But on the other end of the spectrum, I feel like we as translators have a lot of skills that a computer won't ever have. I mean, or within the working lifetimes of those of us who are alive today.
Of an average translator.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, those are things, so I just feel like when you talk about MT, that you have to understand that that there's a shred of truth in every extreme viewpoint, but that the truth is, I think for us is, it's a factor. It certainly is a factor that I think about in my own business. But like I said before, my bottom line is, if my teenage daughter wanted to become a translator or interpreter, I would strongly encourage that. I don't think that we are a dying profession at all. And then to talk a little bit about the increasing number of freelancers in the market, another thing that I think, and I know we're going to talk a little later about factors you can't control, but when I started freelancing 16 years ago, I wouldn't say that freelancing was like super rare, but the type of person who would start a full was perhaps a little bit different than it is now. So one thing is, and you guys can say in your countries if this is similar, I read an interesting article in Forbes recently that said that now 1/3 of Americans make some or all of their income on a freelance basis. And this was the one that really blew me away. 90% of job growth in the US is in freelance or contracting industries that do not provide a guaranteed income, do not provide, health insurance, paid vacation, stuff like that. So I think, and I will say from students, I teach a lot of business classes for translators. And when I started doing that about 13 years ago, the average person who took my classes was someone like a high school foreign language teacher or a lawyer or an engineer who spoke another language and said, like, I'm burnt out on practicing law. I actually had a ton of lawyers. I think that stereotype that lawyers hate their jobs, at least in the US, is true, because I had a ton of lawyers in my classes. Whereas now I would say it is more common that I have people in my classes who will say, right, I grew up speaking English and Portuguese at home, and right now I work in a coffee shop and I make $12 an hour plus tips. So if I could make more than that doing more interesting work from home, I would be thrilled. And I feel like that is one of those factors in our industry that, if you know how to control that, like if you know how to put the internet back in the box, let me know. And if you don't know how to put the internet back in the box, I mean, I know we're going to talk later about factors we can't control, but I just think that is a reality that all of us in the industry have to accept. And, one of the metaphors I always use is like, when a river comes to a rock, the river doesn't stop. The river finds a way to get around the rock. And as freelancers, you have to find a way to get around the rock. I mean, I'm not looking to change careers anytime soon. I made slightly over $100,000, 100,000 US dollars last year, and I don't work like crazy. I work a normal amount, and I take, most Americans take. I don't think we're, circling the drain as a profession at all. But I just feel like you have to accept those things that, you are competing against people who currently have a job as, a bilingual babysitter. I mean, I have people like that in my classes all the time, and who say, if I could make slightly more money than I make in my bilingual babysitter job and work from home, I would be ecstatic. So to wrap up my little opening pitch, I'd say, what are some reasons that people's careers could be stagnating? Lack of active marketing and networking, translating what falls in the inbox and then wondering why everyone else has all the great clients, right? Lack of knowledge which market is headed. So, the factors I mentioned before about, what computers can do versus what humans can do. Low priced competition from people in other countries. That's just a fact in some language pairs. Loss of interest in the job. Some people, the reality is you're just not into it anymore. You need to find something else to do. Or loss of interest in freelancing, because those are two different things, right? Like I have students in my classes a lot who say, I would be so great at this job if only someone would just funnel work to me. And I think, me too. Like, yeah. if you meet somebody who says, like, what I love about this job is the business aspects and doing marketing and things like that. It's the language part that's really hard. Like, well, nobody says that, right? Nobody says that. I've been freelancing for 16 years, and I think, yeah, that would be awesome if someone would just, every day line up a set amount of high paying work for me to do. That would be incredible. But that, isn't the reality of being a freelancer. And I think people who, in general, cling of doing things and aren't open to evolving. That I think as a freelancer, one of the things I love about it is that you're constantly evolving. But people who don't deal that great with change, I think have a hard time as freelancers. Because, for example, for you, Dimitri, if you thought when you were in elementary school, I'm going to be a video game localizer, what did that even mean? That if you are not adaptable as a freelancer, I think that can be really hard. Okay, so over to you guys. I know we have other questions, but did you want to ask anything about that?
I think you covered quite a lot of ground, and you identify clearly all those reasons why a career can stagnate, and I absolutely agree with you. But the main problem a lot of freelancers are having that their career is stagnating, but they're not taking any action. They don't know what to do, or how to improve it. So what would you recommend? How you can start taking action, and perhaps maybe they should start thinking about changing a career path altogether if their career stagnates?
Not yet, but we'll talk about that. So I think, first of all, the main thing when you guys ask me about factors you can't control, and this, so where I live is new agey place. So, and I am really neither Buddhist nor New Age, but maybe I have that type of mindset a little bit. That the first thing with factors you can't control is don't try to control them, accept them, and work around them. So, for example, if you were to say to me, Dimitri, I just feel so frustrated because there's all of this low-priced competition from in-country translators in Russia, I would say, yes, you're correct. And that will continue to be true for your entire career.
Yep.
It used to be in the days before the internet that if you lived in the Soviet bloc countries and you managed to emigrate somewhere else, you had a tremendous advantage in the market because clients could contact you and they couldn't contact in-country translators in Russia. But now with a little thing called the internet, if you do Spanish or Portuguese or Russian or probably, other languages, clients have access to in-country translators who charge a lot more than you do. You cannot fight that. So you have to think, what do I offer that is important to clients who aren't so price focused? Is it that I have a very narrow specialization? Is it that I do a mission critical job for them that they don't want to entrust to someone who isn't in their time zone? Things like that. So I think there just are those realities in the market that the main thing is don't try to control them, and then use the advantages that you have. So for example, in France and Switzerland, I'm the low priced person. Not always, but, especially in countries in Switzerland, the cost of living there is so high that they have to, charge a lot to living. Or like for you, Elena, being in Russia, if your cost of living is less, it's just the reality of the market that you can charge less and live a comfortable life. I think you have to, not get irritated by those factors, but just say like, that's the reality of the market that I work in. So I think the first thing is, kind of force yourself to take the Buddhist attitude and say, the things that I can't control, I'm going to control them. I'm going to stop, be like, maybe for you, Dimitri, what frustrates you is competition from in-country translators in Russia. And maybe what frustrates Elena is that customers in, say, the US have some aversion to sometimes to working with translators. Sits there all day and says, like, that's so frustrating. I'm just as good as, a Russian translator who lives outside Russia. Why are they so paranoid about working with me? That's a complete waste of your emotional energy. Yeah. You need to just find the clients who aren't averse to that and see, like there are great translators living in Russia, and go with the advantages that you have. So I think that's the number one thing.
Corinne, may I interrupt you for a second? What are some of the, since we're talking about factors that are outside of our control, what are some of the other factors that you come across, that you hear a lot about from your students, for example?
So I think, and this gets into, freelance mindset a bit, that a lot of students come to me very frustrated because they say, I really feel like there aren't any agencies that will pay what I want to make, and I will never be successful to find direct clients. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get the point. Yeah. And those are the people who I say, if you really, really in your heart believe that, then you need to find another career. Because, at least probably, this is probably a little different in the US than in Canada or in Russia, but in the US, there are not many in-house jobs for translators outside of like very small pockets. If you live in Washington, D.C. and you want to work for the US government, there are lots of jobs. If you live in the San Francisco Bay Area and you want to do software localization, like Dimitri, you could move to the San Francisco Bay Area.
That would be nice.
Probably find a job.
Much better there.
Find a job right away. But But I think for the vast majority of us in the US, I mean, for me, for that matter, there are very, very few in-house jobs. And so the reality is, if you really have convinced yourself that you can't make enough money in the agency market and that you will never find enough direct clients to, reach your income goals, then you need to think about switching careers, because in the US, those are basically your options.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that as far as factors you can't control, the main frustration I hear is examples that would apply to you guys, actually, is people who do languages where the cost that pair up with a country where the cost of living is a lot lower. I'd say the main ones are Spanish, Portuguese, and Russian. That the out-of-country translators say there's a lot of low-priced competition from in the country. And the in-country translators say the clients in the US or UK or wherever the higher paying market is are phobic about working with me, because they think, they only want to work with someone who lives in a, Western country, or, there's a stereotype that US based clients, I think, prefer working with like North American translators. I mean, I feel like largely that is not really true, but I think that those are the two things that I think, yes, there is a shred of truth in those viewpoints, but if you want a successful freelance career, you have to just force yourself to work around those.
I think that in case of low priced in-country translators who live in countries with a lower cost of living and who charge less, probably some of the US clients just tried working with them and they were not satisfied with the results, because even in a country with a very where the cost of living is much lower than, for example, in US, like Russia, the prices are sometimes so low. I mean, the price, the payment, the translators are paid so little that they have to work a lot, and that always reflects on quality of the translation. And so it's a kind of evil circle there, because U.S. clients or Western European clients don't want to get poor quality translation, so they don't want to work with Russian in-country translators or Portuguese or Spanish. And but they still want to cut the costs, and it's kind of bad for everyone, I'd say.
Right. I think you're totally right about that.
Yeah.
So I think that a few things I would recommend. One is that you only need enough work for you, right? So one thing that I tell people a lot when they say, for example, the majority of agencies don't want to pay my rates, I say, absolutely, that's true for me too. 90%, literally 90%, I'd say, of the contacts I receive from agencies end pretty quickly because they don't want to pay my rates. But you know what? That's okay, because I only need enough work for me. I don't need to keep 14 other translators busy, just myself. So, and I think the same is true of very narrow specializations. That if you have, I have had students in my classes who specialized in chemical coatings, horses, these very narrow specializations, that if it generates enough work for you, you're good. Don't worry about anybody else, just you. And I think another thing I tell people a lot is there is some intersection what you enjoy doing and what you are good at and what clients will pay money for. The intersection might not be where you think it is, but I think that for everyone, there is an overlap between clients who have decent budgets and what you like to do and what you are good at. And then in terms of taking action, I think the main thing, and this sounds kind of simplistic, but I feel like it helps a lot of people perhaps, is stop waiting for the big block of time that is never coming. So, I think so many of us think, I have to do this major overhaul on my business. Everything needs to change. I need a new website. I have to get a new LinkedIn profile, but before that, I have to get new professional pictures taken, and I have to find a web designer. And then I'm going to make this list of 100 direct clients in an industry I want to work in, but I think I might pay somebody to do that for me. So I have to find that person. I mean, the reason why we're all laughing is because we do this too, right? I think we're laughing because it's kind of a common thing. And I think the main thing is just chip away at your goals in very small increments. Use the little increments of time that all of us waste every day, and you'll get there. So, one thing, like my daughter and I both play string instruments. And one thing that both of our music teachers say is, don't practice once a week for 2 hours, practice every day for 20 minutes. And if you practice every day for 20 minutes, I promise you that you're going to see a lot of improvement. And I think the same is true of your freelance business. I'm sure you guys can think of as well. I know I can think of translators definitely who have taken years to get a website launched. Who will say, I had this idea for a new website a year and a half ago, and it's going to be done in 3 months. Whereas I think it's the way to move forward is to say, one thing I do when I'm doing marketing is I sit down at my desk, and before I even open my email, I just do the marketing task for that day. I send a warm email to a content marketing company in Switzerland and, do that before I even do any of my own work. And then it's done for the day. And I think, there's time management gurus, which I'm not, but time management gurus have this saying, which I think comes from a Mark Twain book called Swallow the Frog. If you swallow a frog first thing in the morning, your day can only get better from there. And so I think, that it sounds like very simplistic advice. It sounds like the advice you'd give to a kid in 4th grade trying to get their homework done when you say do the hardest subject first. When my daughter was little, I used to tell her that do your least favorite subject first and just get it over with. But I think that for us, that idea of surely you have 15 minutes, right? If you just sat down at your desk first thing in the morning and did your 15 minutes of marketing, it would be done. And if you contacted 2 new clients a week, how many freelancers do you think contact 100 clients a year? Almost none.
Not so many.
Right. Almost none. And so if you set this really, really modest goal and said, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm going to contact 1 potential client. You would contact 100 clients in a year. And another piece of advice I give people a lot is, at least not when it comes to translations, but when it comes to doing things like marketing, finished is better than perfect. So, for example, with a website, just do something that is professional, that has all of your, information there. It has your, what makes you different, what's your background, what services do you offer. You'd be amazed at how many freelance translators don't have their language pairs displayed prominently on their website or LinkedIn profile, that you think, this is an interesting guessing game to figure out, what language this person does. Whereas that's the number one thing that a client needs to know. Yeah, into, Slovenian. Would you do that? The number one thing that they need to know is what your language is. So I think that when it comes to your marketing materials, finished is better than perfect. Just tell yourself, my marketing materials need to look professional. They need to be error-free. They need to accurately represent what I do. But this whole idea of, I'm going to pause my business. People say this to me a lot, actually. I have this big plan that I'm going to put I'm only going to take on work from my top 1 or 2 clients for a month. And I'm only going to work on marketing. And in reality, I think it is very, very difficult to execute something like that because other stuff always gets in the way. And that it's better to just, chip away at it in small increments. And I saw one of the questions was from Paige. Who
Yeah,
I think
actually,
is
I
here
was I was
live.
going
I think
I
I
was
saw
going
her on
to I was going to ask this question. I mean, it fits right into the topic of your discussion. So Paige is asking us, how do you find balance when still building your business? I feel guilty whenever I'm not working on my business.
Yeah. So the I think I would look at that in a few different ways. So when you which in itself I think is sort of a weird term, because I heard some HR specialist say one time, like, there is no such thing as work-life balance. We should really say like work-life choices, because this HR consultant, I mean, it was sort of a funny moment because she was giving a sort of like a TED talk type thing and said, what priorities would you set in your life if it were all up to you? Pause, pause, pause. Well, guess what? It is. And that's another one of those sort of simple but profound things that I think all things in life that we say, I can't do that what we really mean is I choose not to, or it's not a priority. Like a lot of people I have in my classes are either women or men, but people who have young kids and whose young kids are a big priority in their life. And they'll say, I can't work full time in the summer because my kids are out of school. And I think the first thing I always say to them is, you need to shift your thinking about that, because the reality is you choose not to. I chose that too. I'm not criticizing you for that choice, but what I mean is there are plenty of people in the world who find a way to work full time while they have small children because they outsource their children to someone, right? They hire a babysitter or they send their kids to camp. And what you really mean is time with my children is my priority. And even if you don't say that to your clients, that might be a little off-putting to your clients. You need to say that to yourself, right? You need to say that to yourself. So I think to Paige's specific question, I would say when I think about my own work-life balance, let's use that term for the sake of argument. And a couple years ago, I did a video series for Andrew Morris's Facebook group, which is called Standing Out. Some of you might be members of that. So you've heard this before. I apologize if you listen to those videos. So my two work-life balance goals are fulfillment and no regrets. So I think working hard at a job I love brings me a lot of fulfillment, right? I think I would not be happy even if I could afford not to work. I mean, that to freelancers, that doesn't sound crazy, right? If you say to a lot of people who have, deadly in-house jobs, that might sound kind of crazy, but to a freelancer, and I say that honestly, that even if I could afford not to work, I still would, because I love it and it brings me a lot of fulfillment. But on the other hand, I think things like completely blocking out my weekends for family time is what makes me feel I'm not going to have any regrets in life. I don't want to, the thing I think of now is like, my daughter's 15 and my parents who live near us are in their 70s. I don't to look up from my phone in 10 years and go, oh, shoot, now my daughter's 25 and doesn't need and may not be able to do a lot of, fun stuff with us. And I missed all that because I was working myself to death for what? That I think both of those things are true, that most of us need a career that makes us feel fulfilled, but that at the same time, you have to acknowledge that you cannot press pause on the other aspects of your life while you work yourself into the ground. Or for example, like my husband has had a lot of health problems in the past year or year and a half. And when he really needed me, I made that my priority and said, I will go to every doctor's appointment with you and sit there and take notes and be there, which I couldn't do if I had an in-house job. So the thing I would say to Paige is, as far as your, guilt when you're not working on your business, first of all, there's enough work out there for all of us that you could work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and you wouldn't get it all done. So you have to draw the line somewhere, right? Like trying to get it all done is sort of, that you feel like everything's under control, then you're a lot different from me, because I never feel like that. Or maybe I feel like that about 5 minutes a month, like, whew, everything's, set. There's no fire to put out right now. So I would say, Paige, is if you can work 60 hours a week and feel fulfillment and no regrets, do it. Like, one thing that was really when I did that video series for Andrew's Facebook group was that he said, like, work is his play. Work is the thing that makes him both feel fulfilled and feel like he doesn't have any regrets about what he accomplished in life. And so, one thing I think about, and now this example I think is a little more real to me because it happened to someone in our profession, that I used to say in a sort of amorphous way, this sounds morbid, but if I find out tomorrow that I have 3 months to live, what I want to think is that I didn't get more life. Like, I wouldn't change anything, but my only regret is, 46 years on this earth is kind of short. And home to me more because Yves Baudet and I host a podcast called Speaking of Translation. And we did a podcast about 2 years ago about work-life balance. And one of the people we interviewed was a Australia-based Scandinavian language translator named Andy Bell. And if any of you know him, in August of this past year, he died suddenly of an undiagnosed heart condition. Yeah. And so that's one of those things where you go, like, that's not just an example that I'm pulling out of the air. All of us who, you don't think that way when you're a lot younger, but I sure think that way now, that I hope that doesn't happen. But if I get, hit by a bus riding my bike to work tomorrow, I just want my last thought to be, you know what, I wouldn't change anything. I got my bike trips in Italy with my family. I sat on the beach in Costa Rica with a wild tapir on my 40th birthday. And, and stuff like that. And so I think that perhaps that is more apparent to me because I live in a place that a lot of people move to for the high quality of life. But I just think there are way too many of us who have this big list called someday. Someday I'm going to learn Italian. Someday I'm going to, watch the sunset over the Eiffel Tower. So, and I just think, whatever your someday is, you also have to be realistic that you hope that someday comes, but the chance of someday coming is not 100%. I think the older one gets, the more that is, driven home to you. And one thing that I've sort of accepted is, as a person whose goal in life is like to do everything, that someday I'm going to simply run out of time, even if that's when I'm 94. That I think all of us who are freelancers are those people who go, like, even at age 94, but my next goal was to learn Ukrainian. Like, I still have all these things I want to do. I wanted to be a tap dancer, or whatever. So I think that would be my advice to you, Paige, is if you feel fulfilled working a lot, then do that and be fulfilled. That's okay, and don't let anybody tell you, like, Paige, you really need to take tennis lessons and broaden your horizons here. Because if you think, what keeps me going is my work, that's really okay. But I think at the same time, for most of us, there are way, way too many things on that list called one day I'm going to, and that you have to be realistic that, one day may not come. So that's my advice to you, Paige. Paige said yes in the comments. So hopefully that was helpful.
Speaking about this one day I'm going to list, I'm sure that some of the freelance translators that are probably listening to us now, they have the following thing on this list. They want someday to find the work that they will love, that they want to work on, and they are putting that off. So what would be some of the tips for them how can they find the work that they would enjoy doing?
Sure. So I think, as I mentioned before, step one is to know what you enjoy doing and what you are good at. And to be confident that you are good at the job. I think you need, those three things need to be true. And then I think the easiest thing for most people is, and I sort of alluded to this before, build on a success that you have already had. So, look at what was your, favorite or best or most interesting project of the last year, and really break down, like, how did that client find me? Where did that client working with that client made it so enjoyable? Because for sure, they're not the only client like that on earth. Like, there really aren't any clients there's nobody else like them on the face of the earth. So I think that like I said, that's sort of, one of my things that I say all the time is there are way, way, way too many translators just translating whatever gets thrown at them and then complaining that everybody else finds all the great clients, So I think the main thing is just take some action, because, here's another thing that people who have listened to other stuff of mine may have heard before, but it bears repeating. You know what kind of marketing works? The kind of marketing you do, not the kind of marketing that only exists in your head. Right? And I think, I can think of both myself and other translators I know who have found clients in all different ways. I would say the main technique I use is warm emailing clients, like, emailing people and saying, I came across your NGO's website and I noticed that you are trying to produce your donor materials in English, which is fantastic. But at the same time, as a professional translator, I couldn't help but notice that the quality of the English right now doesn't really mirror the quality of the French, and I'd love to help you change that. That's probably the most common marketing technique I use. But I have also found clients, I get lots of clients through referrals. I know one of your listeners asked about networking.
Mm-hmm.
I get lots of new clients through referrals from translators I know. I've gotten clients. Someone the other day is somebody who follows me on Twitter. You can find clients. I know I personally don't find LinkedIn particularly fruitful, but I know people who do, who participate in LinkedIn groups for their specializations, and who say, oh, I find all my direct clients through the German patent attorneys group on LinkedIn. So I think if you join LinkedIn groups, join them for your specializations and either your non-English language or for English, if you translate from English. So I think, but the main thing is just do something. When you think like, could I put an ad on Craigslist for translation services? Well, maybe. I mean, people who don't know anything about translation will perhaps think, well, I found the guy who mows my lawn on Craigslist. So maybe I could find a translator there.
Sure.
So I think that's the main thing is, just try some different marketing ideas and force yourself not to overthink it. Like 16 people don't need to read the warm email that you're thinking about sending to one client. And I think a lot of people have this real phobia that potential clients aren't going to respond. Like, well, what if I send them something and they never write back? That I think, right? Does everybody write back to your emails? Because if this is the first time you've had anyone not respond to your email, you're a lot different than I am. Like, people don't respond to my emails all the time. So yeah. So I think, force yourself not to overthink it. And like I said, I think that the marketing technique that almost anyone can use is the really basic warm email, which you could send someone as a LinkedIn message or, as a PM on Twitter or anything like that. And just, if you don't know what to say, just say, I'm a French to English translator and came across your website, and I think that there could be some overlap between what you do and what I do. Or I think that your needs and my skills might be a good fit. Would you like to talk more? You know, I mean, that's not the world's most compelling marketing message, but that's something that anybody can do, and it gets the point across, right? You know, like Dimitri could, and I'm sure you do, Dimitri, I'm just using you as an example because you're easy. You know, send an email to some, you know, video game company in Silicon Valley that doesn't currently have a Russian version of their stuff and say, I'm an English to Russian translator, highly specialized in your industry. The Russian market for gaming stuff is huge, and I'd love to help you break into it. Let me know if you'd like to talk further. Like, how long do you think it would take to do that? You got that amount of time, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So
just yesterday, I got an email actually from a colleague of mine. He came across my website and he decided he could reach out to me. He liked my blog and stuff I put out there about video game localization, how to break into this field. And he started an email with, I came across your website, I read your blog, and I realized that you write a lot about game localization. Hey, I'm a game localizer as well. Perhaps we can collaborate on some projects in the future. And what do you know? He was quite on time with that, because I'm actually under a lot of pressure with my current clients, so we might be able to actually work together.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, like the point that you made there, Dimitri, is like, even if you weren't interested, you wouldn't be like horrified by that, right, by that email, right? I mean, I think, you know, what I always tell people is, for some sort of email like that, the worst thing the person is going to do is think, you know, that's interesting, but we don't really need that. They're not going to write back to you and say, never contact me again, remove me from your address book, right? And like you said, you know, once in a while, it's going to happen that you think, wow, this is actually great, because I just got this contact from a really good client that I can't turn down, that I was thinking like, there is no way I can meet that deadline, but I have to figure something out, you know. And here comes this person. And I think I mean, another thing I think is really important when you're doing marketing is like, just treat people like humans, you know. You know, like, do you like being on the other end of a pushy sales pitch? I sure don't. And so when I market to people, I just say, you know, I'm a French to English translator, you know, specialized in your industry. And it seems to me like there might be a need for someone with my skills to help you. And if so, let me know if you want to talk further. And I think if I think about where my clients actually come from, I think probably about 50% are either are referrals from other translators, and then about 50% are clients I proactively contact, or clients who kind of find me out of nowhere, you know, that I get an inquiry and they'll say like, I found your website, I saw your Twitter profile, you know, same thing like that. Or I think probably some people contact from LinkedIn who I don't know that that's how they found me, but I think mine are about 50-50, that referrals are about 50%. And then clients, either I proactively contact them or they find me and send me a sort of, you know, out of nowhere inquiry, are about the other 50%.
And the good thing about marketing in general and sending out emails in particular is that you actually get more confident the more you do it. I was the person who was afraid that I won't get any replies to my emails. I didn't get the replies to the majority of my emails. Guess what? Right. I'm alive, and it's okay. And lately, earlier this year, I published my translation of a book, and I had to send out, I think it was a book about psychology, about psychological problems people have, about problems in the relationship with their parents. So it was targeted towards psychologists. So I sent out, I guess, about 1,000 emails to psychologists, and I didn't get any replies to the majority of them. I got some positive replies. I think I got a couple of the replies that I thought at first were negative, but then we had a conversation and they turned out to be, people just didn't express their thoughts and ideas the way I expected them to, but they actually wanted to give me some advice, and that was okay too. So, and it was actually a good experience, and I think I got a thicker skin after that. I don't make a lot of. I don't think it's a big problem if I don't get any replies to my emails anymore. So you just have to do it and do it consistently.
Yeah. But that's a really, really good point that I think the first few are always the hardest. And after that, that you like really stress out about each word and is it even appropriate for me to be contacting this person and things like that. And after, the more you do it, the easier it gets. I'm actually going to move for a second because I see my battery's really low and I need to move toward a power outlet. So you're going to get seasick for a second here. Sorry.
And in the meantime, I would like to remind everyone who is still with us, you can actually post your questions if you want Corinne, Helena, and me to answer them. We have an Ask a Question section below this video stream.
Right, yeah.
You can post your questions in there and we'll be happy to take them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm happy to keep talking. I just needed some juice in the computer.
Also.
So
maybe
we want to talk. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. We were just talking about the contacting clients and stuff. So I think a question from Renata really fits into the topic of our discussion. Renata asks how to do prospecting with translation agencies, especially when you have little or no experience as a translator.
Mm-hmm.
I think that question comes up quite a lot from your students and people of your course.
Yeah. And for the record, I mean, although I've now been freelancing for almost 16 years, I started from absolute ground zero as well. I had a master's degree in French, but I did not have any contacts in the industry when I started translating. So I can, talk from my own experience as well and say it is possible. It is certainly possible. So the two things for Renata's question that I think you need to focus on are either big agencies that base their hiring primarily or perhaps even exclusively on how you do on their tests. And, we'll talk in a second about the realities of the big agency market that you have to accept. Or local agencies that you can meet in person, or agencies you can meet in person in some way. That could be, for example, at a translation conference or by taking a marketing trip someplace else. So let's talk first for a second about the big agency market. So my take on big agencies used to be, don't do it. It will bleed the life out of you and destroy any shred of enthusiasm you ever had for this job. and talk about when should you find another career, but let me tell you. So from students in my classes, I have sort of adopted a more open-minded way of thinking about this because I had several students in my classes who told me, I've been working for 6 months for, insert name of huge agency, and I feel like it's a really great entry point into the industry. The reality of the big agency market is it's going to be low rates and very fast turnaround times, and you are going to feel like a cog in a very large machine, right? Sometimes in the US, people refer to really huge agencies as the Walmarts of translation. And you can understand where that stereotype comes from, in that their business model is to sell a lot of stuff at low prices. But I think the reason why I feel a little more open-minded about that is because large agencies are relatively easy to break into because they always need more translators. Someone put in the comments, you have to start somewhere, which is true. And I think it is a good way to get sort of a crash course in how the translation profession works and what you enjoy translating and what you are good at. Now, the thing I feel like is really, really difficult is, as a beginner, you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of big agencies will say, here, operator manual for nuclear switch, aircraft engine maintenance manual.
Yeah, we need it yesterday.
Right. Aircraft engine maintenance manual, 10,000 words for tomorrow. What do you think? And the problem is, honestly, as a beginner, I won't say I would have taken that on because my sci-tech background is so weak, I would not have. But I just think the hard part is, as a beginner, you don't know what you don't know. And that a lot of large agencies will let you do whatever you say you can do. So that part of it is really challenging. But I will say I have had several students in my classes now who said, I set myself a defined period of time. Like I said, I'm going to work for big agencies for 1 year. And at the end of that year, I'm done. I'm making a concerted effort to find some, clients that are not so driven by price and speed. And I think, as Paige said in the comments, I think the hard part with people who give translation business advice and say, never, ever, ever work for big agencies, that the question is, then what? And there are other solutions to that. We'll talk about some in a minute, but it's sort of like when I have students in my classes who say they don't want any sort of online presence, let's say for personal privacy reasons, they don't want any sort of online presence, that I say, that's okay. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, but then you tell me, how are clients going to find you? Because when I need anything, these days, I don't open up the yellow pages, right? I haven't even seen a yellow pages in years.
I think it did a great redesign recently. Or maybe I'm mistaken for some other company. I think I saw something very, very similar to yellow pages that I thought was gone years ago, and they started marketing all over the Toronto. Maybe I'm mistaken for some other company, but cool. It was really weird. So they had a comeback of sorts.
I know. One of those things, right, from the last century that you wonder, does that thing even exist? So yeah, and I just saw Anna mentioned in the comments volunteering is another option, and I agree with that. I think, to me, I would say, Anna, that your experience where you had a pro bono client that became a paying client is somewhat atypical. One piece of advice I give people a lot is don't expect the pro bono client to morph into a paying client. Expect the pro bono client to give you a glowing testimonial on your LinkedIn page about how amazing you were that will help you then attract other clients. But personally, I wouldn't go in. I think volunteering is a great idea, but I would not go into it with the expectation that the pro bono client will become a paying client. But let's talk a little bit about local markets and meeting people in person. So when I first started freelancing in 2002, I did three things. First of all, in those days, ATA, speaking about yellow pages, ATA still mailed out a paper member directory, but you could do the same thing with the online directory today. And I just went through and started at A with the agencies and applied to every agency that was not remotely the wrong fit for me. So if they were called Japanese language solutions, I didn't apply to them, but otherwise I applied to every agency. And in the end, I applied to about 400 agencies in the first year that I was translating. Then I joined my local association, so Colorado Translators Association, and through that I met various people who referred work to me. And then the other thing that was quite successful is any agency that was in about an hour drive of where I live, I told them, not entirely truthfully, that I was going to be in their area next week. And could I stop by for 15 or 20 minutes and maybe talk to them a little bit about their business and how I might fit in? So you'll notice that the two things I did there were I put a time limit on it, right? Because I think people have some horror of we'll never get this person out of their office. They're going to be here for hours. So you say 15 or 20 minutes. Right. Could I stop by for 15 or 20 minutes? And I made it clear that this was not my, hard sales pitch moment, that I just said, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your business and how I might fit in. And the point is, most of those agencies wrote back and said, you can come talk to us if you want, but we need to tell you up front that we don't work with people who have less than 5 years, or we don't do a lot of translations into English. And I said, no problem. I'm just trying to learn a little more about the agencies in Colorado and, what your work consists of. And lo and behold, I think out of maybe 10 agencies that I went to, maybe I went to 8 agencies, lo and behold, 5 of them gave me work in the next year because what do you know? They had a huge French to English project and they needed to add a new person. And when they're going to use someone they've never worked with before, I think they're more likely to use somebody who they have met in person, take a chance on someone they've met in person. And I think if you live in a place where your clients, don't live, you could approximate the same thing by meeting them at a conference or taking a marketing trip. Like if you're really starting from ground zero, it might be worth it to take a marketing trip, and now honestly, even international plane tickets are getting so cheap. Like for various administrative reasons, I have to go to Switzerland at some point before the end of the year. And you can fly from Denver to Switzerland in the off season now for like $450, which is about what I pay to go on a trip for the ATA board, like to, Boston from my house. So say like for you, Elena, if you wanted to make a marketing trip to New York, if you went, it doesn't matter to you when you go, right? You can go at a time of year when people aren't really traveling. If you looked for the absolute cheapest ticket that you could get to go from Russia to New York, I'm going to be in New York next week. You just don't tell them that the purpose of the trip is to meet with them. I'm going to be in New York next week. And I wonder if you'd have, 15 or 20 minutes. And another thing that I would say for people who are marketing to clients you can't meet in person is just offer to talk to them on Skype or something like that. I mean, they may not take you up on it, but like for you, Elena, if you were, marketing to clients in the US, or Dimitri, like Silicon Valley people, I think it's always worth saying, I'd be happy to jump on Skype with you for 5 or 10 minutes just so we could have a little, face-to-face conversation. Because one thing that I think for you guys on the call who translate from English into other languages is that clients in the US want to work with people whose English is excellent. And so like for you, Dimitri and Elena, one thing they would know from talking to you is your English is like native level, I mean, I hate to stereotype about my people in the US, but I think, so many people think like, oh, we're this Russian translator, what if we can't communicate with them? And talking to you is like talking to a native English speaker. So I think if you said, I'd be happy to jump on Skype with you for 5 or 10 minutes, that one of the things that they're going to see, and anyone else on the call who, if you translate from English, but your spoken English is really good, always offer that, because I think there is a little bit of that, going on in the U.S. corporate culture. And Paige just commented, you can fly from Miami to Milan for $380. So that, I mean, I think that with all of these, I think, now that the low priced air market has gone international, like we just got air service from Norwegian, even here in Denver. And especially if you don't care what time of the year you go, like when I was looking at Iceland Air to fly to Switzerland, even in the summer, it was like $700, which is, within a freelancer's budget. And if you're willing to go in, February when no one's traveling anywhere, you could probably get it even cheaper. That I think the in-person factor, I feel like, is so important that if you can make a marketing trip somewhere, it would be worth it, even if you need to do it internationally. And Paige, I think you should go to Milan, whatever the case. That's as a closet Italophile, my advice is just buy the $380 ticket to Milan.
Actually, I think it depends on the industry in which we're working. For example, for Dmitry, I think it would be really great to jump on a Skype call with some people from San Francisco. In more formal industries, it might not work. What do you think?
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think like if you work with law firms, even using the expression, I'd be happy to jump on a Skype call.
It's not a good idea. Yeah.
Paige lives in Italy. Sorry about that. Then Paige, I think you should go to Miami. No, stay in Milan and I'll come visit you. I'll bring my bike. Yeah. So, yeah. So actually you bring up a really, really good point there, Elena, that I think having especially if you work for direct clients, which I think is a direction that lots of translators should be thinking about, having your finger a little bit on the pulse of the culture of that industry is super important. So, for example, I have a couple of law firm clients. I don't do heavy duty legal translation, but for example, I have a law firm that handles international relocation for large companies. So like when French companies are going to send their employees to work in the US for a couple of years, they handle all of their official documents. Like they have to have all of their, birth certificates, school diplomas, pay statements translated into English. And I do that. And I know that with the law firm, their number one concern is turnaround time / accuracy. That basically like I've even had law firm clients send me an email and say, we need this done as fast as you can do it. It doesn't charge whatever you want. So that's one thing to know about law firms is that is their pain point. If you want to put it that way, their pain point is like, get it done yesterday. Whereas, and I think you're right, Paige, I think you're right, Elena, that a law firm would see a Skype call is a total waste of their $800 an hour time or whatever. Whereas Dimitri's video game people would probably, that they think, oh, wow, this guy knows the expression jump on a Skype call. This looks really promising. So do you want to talk more about that, Elena? Because I think that's a really good point about knowing the culture of your target industry.
Yeah, actually, I have a story of my own with this jump on Skype expression. I actually landed a client one time, and it probably was due to the fact that I spoke their language. So we really had a Skype call. And he was also thrilled to know that I was using the app. So he was not just talking to someone who was going to translate it into Russian, from English into Russian. He also could talk to a user who was using it and living in another country. And so it was quite an experience both for him and for me. I was just glad to talk to someone who was thrilled to talk to me because I was using something that he had made. So it was nice for both parties.
Yeah, when people make something, they're really, really excited about talking about the product that they have created to people who actually use it. Same for video games. If I play video games myself, which I do. My wife doesn't appreciate that, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, they really get excited to learn from your experience, to see how you experience the product that they have created, what you think about it, what your feedback is, and if you can also help them bring this product to a different market, that's also a benefit, and it can be quite beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an awesome point about, for people who feel a little bit lost in the direct client market, or services that are offered by small or medium-sized businesses, that a great marketing pitch is, I use your product and I love it, and I would love it even more if it was in my language. So I think for people who translate into English, the advantage you have is lots of companies want to be in English. And for you guys who translate from English, the advantage you have is lots of companies, certainly in the US and perhaps the UK, Australia, other English-speaking countries, are pretty phobic about how to expand internationally. So, like if you guys went to, let's say, Elena has this meditation app that she loves, and she thinks, I would love this meditation app even more if I could have my friends over and do the meditations in Russian. And so she approaches the company, and the company thinks like, Russian? What? How are we going to do that? And you go, that's what I do. Like that's what I mean, I think all of us find that sort of, I guess it's just maybe true in general that aspects of other people's jobs seem mystifying. And when it's what you do, it does not seem mystifying at all. So the company comes to Elena and says, that sounds like a great idea, but how on earth would we do that? And Elena goes, well, first I would translate your scripts into Russian. Then we would get a Russian voiceover person to record them. And, I can help you do that. And then we just have to get you on the Russian version of iTunes, or, I don't know if that's applicable, or however people, get their apps and podcasts in Russian. And all of a sudden you've got this company thinking, all of a sudden this sounds doable because we've got Elena, So I think that is a really good place to start, is if you feel a little bit lost, in the direct client market, start with, of course, things that are within the scope of what you could translate, but think, I was on vacation in Italy last summer, and there are, many places could use English audio guides in their. So if I were an Italian to English translator, maybe that's for Paige, although I think Paige just does legal. But, approaching a museum and saying, I had such a great time visiting your museum, and maybe they have some minimal materials in English, but pitching that to them by saying, I loved this experience and I would love it even more if I could have done the audio tour in English. Or like, Dimitri, I think you have a built-in sales pitch right there that you go, I'm a gamer myself, and like, not only do I do this for work, but I'm a gamer myself. And you know what, there is a huge market for your stuff in Russia, and I could help you, do the localization. And I think especially, just a stereotype that for US based companies, it demystifies it a lot when you can explain to them like, no, your meditation app thing, all it is translate the script, get someone to record it in Russian, get on the Russian version of iTunes, and I know how to do all of that for you.
Yeah. And it's also great if you're using the app or the product or whatever, because it just adds a personal touch. Because when you were talking about the emails, of course it's a great starting point just to write a short email along the lines of what you mentioned. But lately I've been getting very strange emails from people who obviously they put the link to my website in their email, but they obviously didn't take, 5 minutes just to have a look at what's going on my website. And they just were so off track with their offers that I just deleted their emails, and I didn't want to reply to that. So it's better to write a short email, short generic email, than to write a lengthy one, but with all the wrong details about what the person is doing. It's just a waste of everyone's time. Yeah.
Right. I get those for my blog all the time, where they, it starts out and it sounds kind of promising. Like they'll say,
exactly. We're probably getting the same.
Reader. Yeah, I'm an avid reader of your blog. And, and I have a guest post that I think is going to be really appealing to your readers on my mobile dog grooming service.
Yeah.
Really like things that I don't know if I've gotten mobile dog grooming service yet, but I've gotten like travel insurance, things that are, not applicable at all.
I got gardening.
You should really publish it. I think your readers might be interested in that.
Yeah.
Just as an experiment.
So the guy, yeah, exactly. So the guy, I know, the next time I should say yes and see what happens. So the guy in the US who's sort of the guru of warm email marketing is Ed Gandi, Gandia. And he wrote an ebook called Warm Email Prospecting. And if you read it, that's not an affiliate deal. I just want to clarify that, because there's a testimonial from me in that book, and I'm not encouraging you to buy the book so that I can, get $1 from him or something like that. I just love his stuff. So he does a fabulous podcast called High Income Business Writing, but like 90% of what he does is applicable to translators too, because it's basically just like freelance word people. So he says for the warm email, 125 words or less. That's not much, especially like I'm a pretty wordy person. It's really hard to pare it down to 125 words. But I think the main thing is insert some detail that shows that you have actually looked at this company's website.
Yeah.
So you say, if you're Dimitri, you say, came across your website and I'm an English to Russian translator, highly specialized in gaming. By the way, congratulations on your award from the on the page. Or by the way, congratulations on the new release of, World of Warcraft 17 or whatever it is. So I think the main thing is just put a detail that shows that you've actually looked at their website. And it can really be one sentence, or sometimes I'll, mention some little personal connection between, me and them. Like, I see that you're located in Geneva and I spent last summer there, something like that. So just put some detail that shows that you're actually, that you actually read their website. And yeah, Ed Gandia says 125 words, which is not very long.
Yep.
Yeah.
We still have one last question. Probably this is going to be the last question, and it's quite a huge topic. Sure. But I don't expect you to cover all the ground with that. And I think we already discussed this in a few bits. So how to choose a marketable specialization and a niche, because this is something a lot of freelancers are struggling with. They don't know what they want to specialize in, and more importantly, whether this specialization is actually going to bring enough income to cover the cost of living and stuff like that. So what are some of the key things in here?
Mm-hmm. So one thing, and I don't know if you have time to look this up and put it in the chat, Dimitri, I wrote a post for my blog. So if you go to thoughtsontranslation.com, the post is called How to Decide if a Specialization is Viable. So I think that'll have some information for people in there. But I think the things you want to think about are what is the barrier to entry in this specialization? So, for example, I think a lot of people gravitate towards legal translation because there's so much work in it, which is true. But at the same time, a lot of competition from lawyers who stopped practicing law and became legal translators. And thanks for that link. Yeah, so there's the post that it's from 2014. So I'll probably say some different stuff now, but you can look at that too. Whereas, for example, one of my primary specializations is international development. And once in a while, I will work with someone who has actual international development work experience, like they worked at the World Bank or they were in the Peace Corps or something like that, but not that often. Most translators in international development are pretty much self-taught when it comes to that specialization. Whereas I would say, for example, in the scientific and technical division of ATA, so the other day I was talking to Karen Kachik, who's a highly specialized French to English chemistry translator. And she said, in the SciTech division of ATA, nearly everyone came to it from a SciTech background, not a language background. So I think that's one thing to think about is like, what is the barrier to entry in this specialization I am considering pursuing? And then another big one, I think, is to look at what are specializations that are dominated by either agencies or direct clients? And does that fit with your preference? So for example, I would say pharmaceuticals are an area that comes to mind, that it's not like you can't find pharmaceutical direct clients, but a lot of pharmaceutical work is from huge companies, like Novartis and, enormous players like that undoubtedly use agencies for the vast majority of their work. Maybe not all, but for the vast majority of it. And on the flip side, if you are that person who wants to specialize in violin making, you probably can, but not for agencies, right? I mean, if you want to if you want to, translate violin making stuff, I mean, that's if once you have an industry where people are spending, $6 million on a concert violin, you've got a translation market, but not for agencies, right? Or if you're the person who says, I want to specialize in, I want to translate for wellness retreats, translate, again, that's a large area with a large marketing budget, but you can't apply to agencies and tell them I specialize in yoga. You have to be willing to work with direct clients. So like for you, for video games, Dimitri, do you work with agencies, direct clients, or both?
I work with both. Actually, the agencies that I work with, they have this very narrow specialization, so they just do video games and nothing else. So.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so I think that's one thing that a lot of people overlook is, what types of, I mean, I think where I see that more is people who have an narration that is viable, but not for agencies. So, people who want to specialize in like Buddhism or horses or cross-country skiing or, whatever their passion is, and that's viable, but not for agencies. I think that's where I sort of see that, trip up a lot. And then I think, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, like how and how much of a potential is there for machine translation to make significant inroads into that you are thinking of. So I would say, for example, for my content marketing and corporate communications work, I feel that that is relatively immune to encroachment by machine translation. Whereas if you translate like software knowledge bases, I mean, I've heard several times, I've never verified this with someone who actually works at Microsoft, but that Microsoft uses unedited MT for their knowledge base articles because the vocabulary is so controlled that it's actually pretty successful. And when, all the person wants to know is like, how do I toggle between all caps, initial caps, and all lowercase? That's pretty easy for MT to handle, right? Where I would say, think like, for you, Dimitri, for like the user interface side of video games, I don't know that I would ever see MT being able to do that because that's a very creative process even to write it, the original, right? Much less to translate it. And then you're thinking when you translate into Russian, you have to think like, are Russians going to get all these cultural references? Like, do Russians know what the McDonald's drive-through is? I mean, I'm sure Russians do, but
just to give an example. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I don't want to be one of those Americans who's like, do you have fast food restaurants in Russia? Do people know what that is? I mean, I know that you do, but just as an example, does the average Russian person know who this, super popular music group is in the US that's referred to in this video game? I mean, that's something that a computer has no idea how to do. So yeah, I think those are some things to think about with your specializations going forward. And then I also think, another one of those like basic but really important tips is do stuff that you enjoy. There's a lot to be said for being happy to sit down at your desk in the morning and think, this is something that I love, that I at least find interesting. I mean, I would say really only when I translate books is the translation something that I would read if I wasn't getting paid to translate it, right? Like I wouldn't read vaccination funding proposals if I wasn't getting paid to translate them, but I find them interesting. I mean, I don't find them excruciating to translate. So I think that that's another thing is that if you're sitting down at your desk in the morning and thinking, like, ugh, then get out. Find something. What's your specialization, Elena?
It used to be marketing, but now I'm also translating books. I have translated 2 books, and I'm planning my next project. Yeah, so I'm also a publisher now. That's another story.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You guys should do an episode on that.
I've been thinking about it for quite some time. I've talked about it in our last episodes of the season, when we just talk about things what we were up to during over
it's
the
just
season.
like a wrap-up episode. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we'll probably do an episode on that, because it's just something quite different from what I used to do, and I really enjoy it, and I just really want to share it with other translators. Dmitry, I think we're running out of time. Are we?
Yeah, yes. We way past the 1 hour mark.
we actually have it. I think that we might get cut off by Crowdcast.
Okay.
in a dozen of seconds. Corinne, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure that our listeners and viewers got a lot of useful information. Please don't forget to share this episode with your friends and colleagues who weren't able to make it, and check out the website of our sponsors at smartcat.ai. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you, Corinne.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.